Testing, 1, 2, 3. Stream test, 1, 2, 3.
Like that. Turns red and that's it.
Oops.
Good morning, everyone. We're just finishing up some paperwork here and we should be started in about a minute from now. Start in a minute. Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all for the 8th meeting of the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee of this term of council on this very first day of December 2023. I can't believe December is here already. I wish to acknowledge we are meeting today on the unceded and never surrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations people. And today's meeting will be more or less devoted to the 2024 budget portion looked after by this committee. Before we begin, I'd like to turn to our committee coordinator for roll call, please.
Councillor Bradley,
Here.
Councillor Dudas,
Present.
Councillor Devine,
Here.
Councillor Hubley,
Here.
Councillor Johnson,
Here.
Councillor Kelly, Councillor Luloff,
Good morning, Chris.
Conseillère Plante, Conseillère Plante, Vice Chair Hill.
Present.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And we do know that Councillor Plant is on her way and will be here in a few minutes. Okay, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest related to today's meeting? Seeing none? Any declarations? No?
Mr. Chair, if we're not voting on the budget items, I do not have a declaration of interest, but will when we do actually vote on the budget.
Item 3 is the confirmation of minutes from our meeting on the 19th of October, 2023. Are the meeting minutes carried? Carried, thank you. We will come back to item 4 in a second for presentation with respect to the budget. Item 5, status update, Emergency Preparedness Protective Service Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 22 November 2023. Any issues with this, Councillor Luloff?
Pardon the confusion, Mr. Chair. I do have to declare interest if it pleases you. I'll do that right now.
Is this with respect to the budget?
Yes,
Okay, let me just deal with item 5 and I'll come right back to you.
you got it.
Any issues with this, or can we receive this item? This is item 5.
Received.
Received, thanks very much. Okay. Okay, we'll come back now to the budget and Councillor will state your declaration at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, Councillor Matthew Love, declare a potential deemed pecuniary interest on the following portions of the 2024 Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee draft operating budget. Emergency and Protective Services, Fire Services, Operating Resource Requirement Communications, page 7 of the EPPS budget book. As my spouse is employed by Versaterm Public Safety, a software firm that provides services to the Ottawa Fire Service, and would receive funding from, or would potentially receive funding from, this budget line item. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry for the confusion.
No, thank you, Councillor Luloff. It's a bit hard for me to hear this morning, but I appreciate you putting that declaration on the floor, and we will note that in particular when we vote. Are there any other declarations? Seeing none, very well. All right, so today we'll be considering relevant portions of the draft 2024 operating and capital budgets and making recommendations to Council for consideration at Council's meeting on December 6th, 2023. This committee has done significant work this year towards achieving the term of council priorities and ensuring residents have access to the essential emergency and protective services they depend on. Early in this year, committee approved the 2023-2026 bylaw review work plan. The committee made investments in the Ottawa Paramedic Service to address increasing response volumes and support employee well-being. Committee also directed staff to implement a 3-year pilot for on-demand accessible taxi cab service. Recently, this fall, we approved a new permit regime for clothing donation boxes, and we can continue this great work by ensuring that Budget 2024 reflects the requirements that our paramedic, fire, bylaw, emergency management, and other public safety functions need to continue to operate smoothly and reliably. Staff will now present the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee draft 2024 budget, and I will recognize the General Manager, Kim Ayotte, at this point. General Manager.
Thank you, Chair Brockington. Today, we will be presenting the draft 2024 budget for the Emergency and Protective Services Committee. Nous présentons aujourd'hui le budget provisoire du 2024 pour le Comité des services de protection et de préparation aux situations d'urgence. We will then hear public delegations. Staff are available to answer questions from members of committee that members of committee considers for this draft budget, for the draft operating and capital budgets, and forward its recommendations to Council. Je suis accompagné par mes collègues, Roger Chapman, Director of Bylaw.
With me, Robert Chapman, my colleagues.
Brian Perot, Manager of Business Technical Support Services Branch, Paul Hutt, Chef des Incendies d'Ottawa, Pierre Poirier, Chef du Service de Paramedic d'Ottawa, Valerie Bietlow, Manager of Public Policy Development Branch, and Beth Gooding, Director of Public Safety Services. Today, we are presenting a draft budget for all emergency and protective service areas. The Emergency and Protective Services 2024 budget is moderate. It's in support of the budget direction of 2.5% tax increase and in recognition of the current financial realities of our city. Each of our services will explain their investments for 2024 as they relate to the term of council priorities. They'll also cover any projects or initiatives that are moving forward in 2024 that relate to the priorities that came up through the service review process. The department is making investments to ensure that we continue to provide the services residents rely on, while ensuring our equipment and infrastructure is climate resilient and emergency response ready. Le département investit
The department is investing to ensure that we can continue to offer services that residents in Ottawa depend on, ensuring that our teams and that our infrastructure is able to resist climate change and is ready to intervene in case of emergencies.
My colleagues will be presenting. Our budget also includes adjustments totaling $6.7 million for cost of living allowances being factored into the staff compensation costs. Over 80% of the Emergency and Protective Services operating budget is allocated to compensation. I will now turn the presentation over to Chief Financial Officer Cyril Rogers to present the operating and capital summaries. Je laisse maintenant la parole au directeur financier, Cyril Rogers.
Now, Cyril Rogers, who will present to us a overview of the budgets,
Thank you, Kim, and good morning.
operating and capital budgets.
We can go to slide 3. There you go. So same format that I've been presenting throughout. So consistent format that you're going to see again today. So overall, the EPS committee budget is just shy of 400 million, $389.9 million. What you see is you have 16 million on the capital side of the investments, and you have 374 million for the operating side of the equation. Overall, we do have 26 projects on the capital side, mainly on buildings and equipment. So I'll speak a little bit later in the preceding slides. We are seeing an increase of 46 FTEs in this budget, and this is basically 2 on the public on that side for emergency management. We have 12 for the new fire station in Canada West. We have 28 for paramedic and Pierre's shop, and then we have 4 additional bylaws for Rogers' shop. Next slide, please. So this is the various service areas that report through the department for EPS and through committee. And again, what you see is a little bit of a change in different service areas in terms of the increases to the prior year. Overall, is just over 5.1% increase on the net expenditure side at a total level. On the growth side, it's about 5.9%. So in that 5 to 6% range overall across the department. There are some obviously different factors across the table when you look at the different changes and increases. On the GM side, that's mainly compensation and inflationary pressures. That's exclusively what that relates to, an increase there. On the public safety and services side, we do have an additional 2 FTEs that I mentioned in the previous slide. That's why you're seeing a little higher increase there. On the fire side, we do have the 12 new staff and some additional costs for a new station that's opened up in Canada West. Paramedics, again, that's 28 resources that we're seeing there. As we know, paramedics is, a component of the budget is 50% funded from the province. There's a couple of smaller programs that are 100% funded. So net is roughly about 56% of the budget is funded from the province when you factor in the different programs. When we look at bylaw, so there are additional resources there. That negative increase is really driven by additional parking fines revenue. So the revenue is starting to come back to the pre-pandemic levels. So that revenue is now reflected there. So we're adding costs, but when you look at the net change year over year, the additional revenue kind of drives it to a -1. So there's not no reductions there. That's just the nature of how we kind of flow the accounting through. And then on the public policy side, it looks like a big number, but because the budget is so small, any smaller increase kind of creates a bigger percentage perspective. And that's mainly related to some work required in the bylaw work plan. Of importance as also I want to mention, I've been mentioned throughout my presentations, there is 40K of efficiencies in this budget. Sounds like a small number, but when we go across the organization, we task all departments to look at discretionary spending areas where we can reduce. It's smaller here because majority of where we find those savings is in travel, conferences, office supplies. Given the nature of this committee and given the nature of this operation, very frontline, very legislative in terms of the training component, there's less flexibility for this department to kind of, be real tight on that savings because again, they're really frontline driven. So it's not like they can, ordering less pens, it's not a big issue for them. So that's why you see a smaller component. Some of the other areas I've referenced $200,000-$300,000 savings. It's just the nature again of the operation. The next slide, please. So on the capital side, again, overall $16 million, really just 2 main components is the building side of the equation and equipment. So the budget is split between those 2 components. On the growth, we do have some additional investments in residual investments in the fire station in the Canada West, and we also have some additional investments for the paramedic posts. The other components is really about life cycle of existing buildings and equipment. Obviously, this department, again, very intensive in terms of the equipment that they need to run their operations. So that's what you see there is a mixed bag of the upgrades to existing facilities and then additional life cycle on their equipment needs. So with that, I'll pass it over to Roger, I think, and we can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Cyril. Aligned with the priority a city that has affordable housing is more livable for all, BLRS has two investments for the 2024 draft budget. $510,000 towards 4 new FTEs to help address increased call volumes, and $404,000 for the replacement of communication and technology equipment will help streamline dispatch and ensure officers have the equipment they need. These investments will allow for continued quality and reliable service that our residents expect. Next slide, please. Aligned with the priority, a city is more connected with reliable, safe, and accessible mobility options. BLRS has one investment in the 2024 draft budget. $4.5 million is allotted to establish a new automated speed enforcement center approved by council earlier this year. This includes funding for the required FTEs and other non-compensation operating costs. These costs will be recovered from the program revenues. This investment supports council's goal of reducing fatal and major injury collisions on municipal roadways. Pass it over to Nathan.
Conformément à la priorité, une ville verte et résiliente.
To respect a green and resilient city, services will invest to reduce emissions by allocating $215,000 for the purchase of 3 new hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles to meet the needs, operational needs that come from the new programs and from the increase in service requirement. In addition, municipal services invest an amount of $490,000 for the life cycle of buildings, taking into account the seasonal changes and extreme weather conditions. The protection of our buildings from climate change will enable us to continue to offer reliable services. Next slide.
Bylaw and Regulatory Services also has 2 initiatives moving forward in line with the city's service review goals of enhancing the client experience and providing better value for our residents. As previously reported to council, BLRS has seen an upward trend of service requests for at least a decade. We are anticipating another 10% increase in service requests in 2023. The service is currently undertaking analysis with an aim in developing a sustainable plan for long-term staffing needs to mitigate the effects of continued growth, with an aim of improving service to our community and ensuring high client satisfaction. Next slide, please, and I'll turn it over to Chief Hutt.
Thank you, Director Chapman. And today I'm fortunate to have my colleague, Colleen Woolsey, that will co-present with me. Aligning with the priority of a city that has affordable housing and is more livable for all, Ottawa Fire Service, the Ottawa Fire Service has 2 investments in the 2024 budget to help meet the demand on our service from a growth and improve results.
Cadré avec la priorité, une ville comptant des logements abordables.
For affordable housing, the fire services will have 2 investments in the preliminary budget 2024 to help meet the needs, the growing needs of growth and to improve results.
There is $2.2 million for the operating of the new Canada North Fire Station, which will improve emergency response times in the areas of Canada North and South March. This includes 12 firefighters, full-time firefighters at the station, as well as the operating facility costs. There's also $2.7 million in capital costs associated with converting Station 81 on Stittsville Main Street to a composite station with both career and rural firefighters, which will improve response times in the area, which has seen significant growth and intensification. Next slide, please. Under the priority, a city that is green and resilient, the Ottawa Fire Service is making investments in increasing the resiliency of the service and can reduce emissions.
Conformément à la priorité une ville verte et résiliente.
To respect a resilient and green city, fire services expect investments to ensure resiliency and to reduce emissions.
There is $2.6 million for building and life cycling projects, which will include measures to account for increased extreme weather conditions where feasible. This includes, for example, reflective or metal roofing to build resilient to heat, winds, and heavy snow. There's also $4 million of fire equipment life cycle renewal, which includes the transition from gas-powered equipment options where feasible for life-saving equipment. Some examples of this are exhaust fans, saws, rescue tools that are used in day-to-day operations. Next slide, please. Ottawa Fire Service has three initiatives moving forward and in line with the city's service review goals.
Le service des incendies d'Ottawa mettra
Fire services in Ottawa will implement three initiatives
avec les objectifs de
in line with the objectives of the city.
Ottawa Fire Services life cycle renewal program provides fire services with equipment in both current and reliable, which reduces the possibility of failure during operations. This allows for continued quality and reliable emergency response while providing due consideration for the safety of staff and residents. The 2019 Standards of Cover analysis identified areas of urban density outside the Greenbelt that poses challenges to maintain and achieve our response benchmarks. The conversion of Station 81 in Stittsville to a competent station will help the right resources to the emergency faster. Staff are looking closer into areas of expansion through an updated Standards of Cover to identify possible new stations and expansions. Results of this analysis will be brought to committee and council during this term. As previously reported to committee, Ottawa Fire Service Training Center has exceeded current capacity. The service is exploring options to designate, design, build, and construct a new facility which would accommodate our diverse training needs of firefighters and ensure we can meet provincial requirements and training standards. Thank you. I will now pass it over to Paramedic Chief Pierre Poirier.
Merci, puis bonjour.
Thank you, and good morning.
Aligning with the priority, a city that has affordable housing and is more livable for all. The Ottawa Paramedic Service has three investments which will help meet demand with population growth and aging demographics and ensure we continue to meet residents' needs. There's $2.4 million to hire new Ottawa Paramedic Service staff and associated equipment to address ever-increasing response volumes and to improve or help improve our response times, which Council approved as part of our 2024 to 2026 Ottawa Paramedic Service Investment Plan. There is $975,000 in capital costs for life cycle replacement for medical equipment, technology, and systems, which ensures that equipment is current, safe, and reliable for effective day-to-day operations. Next slide. Under the priority, a city that is green and resilient, the Ottawa Paramedic Service is investing $503,000 for eco-friendly emergency response vehicles and associated equipment to support the staff hired to address growth. Provincial legislation stipulates stringent vehicle standards and equipment requirements. However, the Ottawa Paramedic Service will procure hybrid emission-reducing emergency response vehicles. Next slide. Le service paramédic d'Ottawa a également
The service has two initiatives that are moving forward that are in line with the city's objectives to improve client experience and to offer a better quality.
In 2024, the Ottawa Paramedic Service will be implementing the province's new dispatch tool, the Medical Priority Dispatch System, or MPDS. Le MPDS améliorera le déploiement.
MPDS will improve paramedic deployment to meet the needs of residents and by giving priority to calls that are the most urgent ones. This will improve wait times and results for patients. Ottawa Paramedics Services is continuing to apply the plan that was approved by the council by hiring indispensable staff to meet the needs of the growing volume. Thank you.
Beth?
Next slide, please. Thanks. So under the priority, a city that is green and resilient, the Public Safety Service has two investments which will help us respond to the impacts of climate change and increase capacity for emergency response. First, as recommended in the 2022 OAG audit of the governance of the city's pandemic response, the Office of Emergency Management is investing $100,000 to add 1 FTE, which will build capacity in the city's emergency management program and support the team's workload. Second, an investment of $555,000 towards the life cycle renewal program ensures that staff in the Public Safety Service have current and reliable equipment, allowing us to provide sustained, effective day-to-day operations in the city's security program, corporate radio program, and emergency management program. Next slide. Donc, le service de sécurité publique a deux
Public
initiatives.
safety has two initiatives when evaluating services. First off, an evaluation of 911 calls. This evaluation will enable us to determine if there are some savings that can be adopted thanks to a different model of service delivery, and to see if there are improvements that can be adopted before the set date of 2025 by the CRTC in order to be ready for the 911 services for future generations. Public Safety Service also implements recommendations from audit reports, including the one from the pandemic and the audit report from the City of Ottawa after the truckers' convoy. Valerie Bietlat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Director Gooding. The Public Policy Development Service will be focusing on the work and the bylaw reviews on this term of Council's bylaw review work plan, which was approved by Council earlier this year. One of the key themes for this work plan is the comprehensive review of the city's licensing bylaw, which is in line with Council's priority of ensuring a city that is a city with a diversified and prosperous economy. Substantive reviews of several business licensing schedules will be conducted throughout the term of Council, with accompanying staff reports being brought forward at various intervals. We will then bring forward a new, updated, and comprehensive business licensing bylaw at the end of term for committee and Council consideration. L'un des thèmes clés du plan de travail pour
One theme that is a key for this evaluation for permits, which will be a project to support a diversified and prosperous city. Evaluations in different categories will be conducted throughout the current mandate, and specific reports will be presented at different intervals.
Business licensing bylaw review will focus on modernizing existing regulations, seeking opportunities to leverage technology and streamline licensing processes, as well as reducing red tape and administrative burdens for businesses where possible. Important Council initiatives such as the new nightlife economy strategy and the equity and inclusion lens will also inform our review of licensing regulations and processes throughout this term. So thank you. I'd like to pass it back to General Manager Ayotte. Next slide, please.
Thank you. We can probably move ahead a couple of slides.
Yes. So thank you, members of the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Committee, for your time today. We look forward to any questions you may have. Merci pour votre temps. That's our presentation.
Thank you for your time, and that's it for our presentation.
and the entire front bench for the presentation this morning on the draft budget. It's appreciated. We do have 4 delegations that will be speaking to this agenda item in just one moment. What I would like to do first is get the actual motion on the floor. So I'm going to ask the vice chair to read in the roadmap motion. And then I'll ask if there are any other motions from members of the committee, which I believe at this point there are none, but I always like surprises if there are any. And then we'll proceed with our delegations. So Vice Chair, I'll turn to you and please read the entire motion on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee recommend that Council, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee 2024 draft operating and capital budgets as follows. 1. Emergency and Protective Services Department, General Manager's Office and Business Support Services, Operating Resource Requirements, page 2. 2. Public Safety Service as follows. A. User Fees, page 5. B. Operating Resource Requirements, page 4. 3. Ottawa Fire Service as follows. A. User Fees, page 8 to 10. B. Operating Resource Requirements, page 7 as follows. I. Communications, II. Remaining Fire Service Operating Resource Requirements. 4. Ottawa Paramedic Service as follows. A. User Fees, page 13. B. Operating Resource Requirements, page 12. 5. Bylaw and Regulatory Services as follows. A. User Fees, page 17 to 25. B. Operating Resource Requirements, page 16. 6. Public Policy Development, Operating Resource Requirement, page 27. 7. Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee Capital Budget, pages 28 to 29. Individual projects listed on pages 48 to 70. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So that's the roadmap motion we'll be voting on later on during this meeting. So at this point, I'd like to invite our delegations forward. We'll begin in order received. And our first delegation is Mr. Dave Andre, President of the Ottawa Professional Firefighters Association, Local 162. Mr. Andre, please step forward. All delegations are provided 5 minutes. I'll give you a 1-minute warning when we get to the 1-minute point, and then I'll ask members of the committee if they have any questions for each of our delegates. So good morning, Mr. Andre.
Good morning. We're good to go?
Yes, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is David Andre, and I'm the president of the Ottawa Professional Firefighters Association and proudly represent the 960 members who are full-time firefighters with Ottawa Fire Services. Bonjour, je m'appelle David Andre et je suis le président de
Hello, my name is David Andre. I'm the president of Ottawa's Professional Firefighters. I represent 960 full-time members.
To the residents of Ottawa. We attend medical incidents, automobile accidents, industrial accidents, water rescues, high-angle rescues, confined space rescues, hazmat calls, collapse rescues, trench rescues, and you can now add to that list helping transfer babies from the neonatal intensive care unit of the Ottawa Hospital to the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. We are an all-hazard response. Our members are glad to help in any way they can, whether it be pulling you from a fire or responding to medical calls where seconds count. While the OPFA is conscious of the current budget pressures, we would like this committee to consider the needs of the Ottawa Fire Services. Our hope is to work collaboratively with the Fire Services Management team to increase staffing in areas that need it. The City of Ottawa has endeavored to make mental health a priority for its employees. We applaud those initiatives and the improvements we have seen in our collective agreement through arbitration for mental health benefits. However, that means more members on leave, getting the help they need to ensure they can one day return to work. Studies show we are at a heightened risk of developing mental health injuries. We believe investment in the form of a mental health specialist will pay for itself. This person would be responsible for all things related to mental health, including the prevention component, such as resiliency training. Our training division is staffed with 12 members who deliver and prepare training for all Ottawa firefighters. They are under immense pressure every year to deliver more with the same number of staff. The safety and well-being of our members and the public they serve starts with training. This division of only 12 employees are tasked with not only training groups of recruits every year, but are also tasked with ensuring that our current members meet the high standards set by this council. Provincial legislation requiring all firefighters to be certified by July 1st, 2026 has meant an exponential increase to their workload. They are responsible for ensuring that all 960 members of our association, as well as the 450 paid on-call firefighters, are compliant with the mandatory firefighter certification legislation. Our maintenance division and radio depot, which provides all equipment and repairs, as well as the distribution and cleaning of personal protective equipment, and so much more, has 4 full-time equivalents. They could also use additional staff to meet the ever-changing and growing needs of the Ottawa Fire Services. All Ottawa Fire Service suppression firefighters are thankful to now have 2 sets of bunker gear, which is rapidly becoming an industry standard. That alone has doubled the workload of washing and maintaining the equipment that enables us to enter burning buildings. On top of that, science has taught us that we must wash said gear after every fire to reduce our exposure to harmful carcinogens. Other emergency departments across the city have made tremendous gains in FTEs. We applaud and support those improvements as the current opioid crisis has led to a substantial increase in call volume for all City of Ottawa emergency services. Our members continue to proudly staff the trucks and answer the call and protect the great citizens and guests to our beautiful city. But this comes at a great physical and mental toll to our members. They're exposed to more traumatic incidents, toxic exposures, and physical injuries. Mental health and cancer claims are on the rise for our firefighters and our other emergency first responders. Increased staffing would help reduce all these exposures and have a positive impact on the members' long-term health. We thank this council and previous councils for the work that has been done to get a new Canada North station built. Our members are anxious to begin staffing this new fire station with the industry standard of 4 firefighters on a pump. There was a little section on Stittsville, but the chief addressed it nicely, and we are anxious to see that happen in 2025.
1 minute.
So I will skip over that. As firefighters, it's a privilege to serve the people of this great city. These additional resources for our growing city will help us better serve your constituents. On behalf of the members of the Ottawa Professional Firefighters Association, who serve this community with both pride and professionalism, I'd like to thank you for your time and taking into consideration the suggestions we have.
Well, thank you very much, President Andre, first of all, for your delegation today, but also for articulating the needs of your members very clearly to this committee. I do look to my colleagues for questions. I do see a couple hands, so I'll start with Councillor Luloff and then the Vice Chair. Councillor Luloff.
Merci, Monsieur André.
Thank you, Mr. Andre. I'm so impressed by our fire services, our men and women who are always working to ensure that we are safe.
Utterly impressed with the work of your members. You do an incredible job every single day, keeping us safe. I want to thank you for your delegation and especially your focus on mental health. I think that it's widely known that people that are within the first responder trades are exposed to traumatic incidents every single day when something terrible happens. Oftentimes, it's our firefighters that are there first on the scene. And I just want to thank you for the incredible work that you do, your focus on mental health, and the great volunteer work that your members do in the community as well. Merci encore.
Thank you, Councillor Luloff. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar line of questioning. I just kind of want to get a bit specific, though. I don't for a second doubt that we need to invest in our members in terms of mental health. Are you suggesting that the current budget that we have before us does not meet the needs that we are looking to do with regard to this and that we need to make additional investments?
So my suggestion is, and it's not broken down probably enough in the budget, is that Ottawa Fire Services, and I kept it very broad as mental health specialist because I think we would be happy with anything that put a person in charge of that portfolio. It's currently being taken care of by training officer who has other duties, i.e. 6 months of the year, helps train recruits. So I think the way they're going in most emergency services is that somebody would be assigned that portfolio, which obviously in this case probably would require an extra full-time equivalent. And, you know, I guess the dream is a psychologist on staff that could be used at any time by our members, but any type of help that would take care of the training, our peer support program, and anything else, any resources our members may require in mental health. One of our government relations members was relating a story this morning to the Honorable David Piccini that one of our mental health claims he did for WSIB, the person actually waited 8 months to see a psychologist. So again, any help we can get that will improve the mental health of our members and get them back to work, I think we would be happy with.
Well, thank you very much for your delegation. Thank you very, very much for everything that your members do on a day in and day out basis. My ears perked up when you spoke to the incident of moving babies out of hospitals, because I was actually on a ride along with the police that night, and I heard the whole thing on the radio, and I was extremely impressed with the calm professionalism that I heard from all of our first responders that night. So thank you very much. I will follow up your question with management.
Thank you for the kind words.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Seeing no other colleagues with their hands up, thank you, President, for coming today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our next delegate is Ms. Vanya Karem. And is Ms. Karem a virtual delegate? The clerk indicates this delegate is not online, so we will do a second call after another delegate, so we'll come back. Next is Ms. Anya Fraser. Ms. Fraser, good morning to you. We do see you, and you have 5 minutes this morning for your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Anya Fraser, and I'm a resident of Sandy Hill. First off, I want to say thank you to the men and women who work tirelessly in emergency services. On the worst night of my life, I had to take an ambulance to the general, and the paramedics who treated me showed me such compassion and professionalism. Ottawa's first responders truly care about the people they serve, so thank you. Their job is enormous. There's a seeming never end to their calls, and their job is often thankless, sometimes worse. I've seen a paramedic assaulted in Sandy Hill. I can only imagine how frustrating and stressful it is to be a first responder in my neighborhood, what with the out-of-control drug problem here. I know that 911 is flooded with calls, and first responders are maxed out most of the time. My neighbors and I often struggle to get through to 911 when there's an emergency. Sometimes we're told that what we think is an emergency isn't really an emergency. More often than not, my neighbors and I don't bother calling anymore. This is problematic for 2 reasons. First, often what starts out as a non-emergency can become an emergency in short order, like the time I saw someone injecting drugs on my way to Loblaws. I didn't bother calling that in because I thought it'd be a waste of paramedics' resources to do a wellness check on him. But on my way back, I saw that he had OD'd and my neighbors were calling 911. Second, police and first responders need people to call in crimes and emergencies, so you have data to justify assigning adequate resources to meet those needs. So I have a potential solution that will help reduce the number of 911 calls that you must respond to. I know you track where emergencies take place, and you have heat maps showing areas that suck up a disproportionate amount of your resources. I live in one of those hotspots. I see fire people and paramedics responding to crises in my neighborhood every single day. Now, we all know that in these hotspots, it's only a few addresses that are the root cause for most of the 911 calls. In some cases, it's specific addresses that are getting an insane number of 911 calls, like the Sandy Hill Community Health Center and Center 454. But at least they're calling 911 most of the time when their clients OD or need help. In other cases, 911 calls aren't necessarily being directed to a particular address, but the number of 911 calls in an area within a few hundred meters of a certain address have suddenly spiked. This is what's happening with RespectRx. Since they've opened, the number of ODs within the 300-meter radius of their address has skyrocketed. Access crime, violence, public disturbances, etc. Now, if these addresses were private residences, there's not much you could do besides continue to be professional and respond to those calls. But in this area, those problem addresses often belong to businesses and organizations which need permission from the city to continue to operate. Take your data on 911 calls, use that to identify problem addresses, then terminate their operating licenses on the grounds that they are costing the city hundreds of thousands of dollars in emergency services. If a restaurant kept giving people food poisoning, the city would shut it down. If there were a spate of drunk driving incidences, and when questioned by the police, all the drunk drivers said that they got wasted at a certain pub before getting in their vehicles, that establishment would lose its liquor license. If a pharmacist handed out toxic drugs that increased the number of people overdosing, then maybe their business license should be suspended and that data referred to the professional body that governs pharmacists. Now I can see the appeal of allowing RespectRx to operate. They claim to reduce the number of overdoses, which we desperately need in the midst of this opioid epidemic. But they're entirely funded by the feds, so there's no cost to the municipal government. But neither of those statements are true. RespectRx are increasing the number of overdoses, and RespectRx is costing the city of Ottawa hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra policing, emergency response, social work, and cleanup costs. Now I could go on and on about how these problem addresses are costing their clients in terms of lives lost and prolonging their suffering, and the costs they impose on local residents and businesses. But I only have 5 minutes, and this is a budget meeting, so I will focus on actual dollar costs to the municipal government. This committee should use your data on emergency response locations to identify problem addresses and determine exactly how much each of them is costing the city in terms of emergency response costs per year. Then you should share that data with the relevant municipal budget committees and city councillors whose wards they are located in. And then you should contact the municipal bodies responsible for giving those businesses and organizations an operating license and ask them to shut down those problem addresses on those grounds. Now, shutting down these problem addresses will not end all emergency calls in my neighborhood, but it will significantly reduce their numbers. Not only will this lower the demand on your services, but it will also lower demand on police services, bylaw, and community and social services. Thank you for this opportunity and for all the work you do.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I do note Councillor Plante has her hand up, and I'll recognize her.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just want to apologize too at the beginning. I was a couple minutes late coming in from an event in my ward. So thank you so much for your patience. Thank you, Anya. I just had a question. Have you spoken to RespectRx, Center 454? Like, what has been the community engagement on both ends, with you with them and them with you? Because again, we are talking about the resources we have to use to kind of manage this. So I just want to know, just from the community side, how it's been managed, or how you've been able to manage your relationship with them.
It's been incredibly difficult. RespectRx doesn't really talk with the community at all. On the 2 occasions that they have spoken to neighborhood associations, one time they said they can't measure the externalities, and another time they said no problems were happening. So like, which is it? We're getting more response now from Sandy Hill Community Health Center since Wendy's started working there. But Center 454, there's no accountability. There's no body overlooking. They're not tracking complaints. And there's no way for like residents we've done freedom of information requests to see like, how much is this costing us as taxpayers to have these things in our community? And we're blocked at every corner. Like, we asking them, how many complaints are you getting? How many 311 complaints have you had? How many 911 complaints have you had? And there's no answers. Right. They just sort of block you, or they don't respond, or they say they're doing their hardest.
Right.
So I would like to see quantifiable numbers of like, how many 911 calls have they had? How much has that cost the city?
Right. And then can you, because this comes up a lot, by the way, what is in your view a good neighbor policy or a good neighbor bylaw? I'm not even sure what the difference is, but what is in your view is it?
At the very least, I would like to see these organizations have to track the number of 911 calls they get and number of 311 complaints they get, and also to track the informal complaints they get from neighbors. And yeah, I think that would be at least a starting point.
like a dialogue mechanism even with the community. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Anya. I always appreciate your interventions, and you live in the best ward in the city. I just want to remind you that because it's true. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser, for your delegation. We appreciate that. Thank you very much. Next delegate is Ms. Cheryl Parrott, representing the Hintonburg Community Association. And is Ms. Parrott online? Yes, good. Cheryl, good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
No stranger to delegations. You have 5 minutes, followed by potential questions from my colleagues. So please proceed.
All right, let me just move things around here. Okay. So good morning, Chair and Councillors. My name is Cheryl Parrott, and I'm representing the Hintonburg Community Association. And we feel you don't have enough bylaw officers, and I'm going to show you a series of slides to illustrate our concerns from this past summer. So the state of our vacant properties and some other properties this summer has been terrible. It's worse than in previous years. And I heard Director Chapman say that calls are up 10%, and I believe it because the officers can't keep up. So we've tried to play our part since the implementation of the vacant property strategy and the permit system, and we were thrilled when that came in. But it hasn't worked like we thought, and I know new things take a while, but holy smokes. Next slide, please. So in Hintonburg, we have about 2% of our units are vacant, and many of them are boarded, and most have been empty for 3 to 10 years. Of the approximately 60 buildings that we're aware of, only 12 posted a contact phone number, as they're required to do under the vacant permit system. None of the others did. And we had contact email for 2 other properties. Next slide. So on August 4th, we tried an experiment. So I called and emailed the contacts for 13 different properties. I identified myself as a neighbor and asked them, as a good neighbor, to cut the 4-foot-high weeds, pick up piles of garbage, paint the plywood over doors, secure open outbuildings, etc., etc. Next slide. Of the 13 that were contacted, only 1 complied right away. 1 complied slowly over a period of a month, and that's because it was really quite a big job. By the beginning of August, the weeds, huge amount of weeds. So they did, but it took them a while. One I called assumed I was a bylaw officer and immediately asked me for the compliance date. And silly me, I explained I wasn't from the city, but as a neighbor, hoped he would clean up the property. He didn't. And clearly this was not his first encounter with bylaw because he knew about compliance dates. The others ignored the requests. Another development property is owned by the husband of someone active in a neighboring community association, and requests to them fell on deaf ears, and that was very hurtful and sad. Next slide, please. Neighbors have had to live beside these messes all summer. At least 4 of these buildings we're aware of also had break-ins and people living inside, and this is a huge fire risk. We had hoped that we could take some of the workload off of bylaw with this permit system and having to post phone numbers, and neighbors could call. And it certainly hasn't worked. In fact, it delayed the whole process by a good month because I called them, gave them time to comply. I was away for a little bit. So then by the end of August, we were forced to call bylaw anyway. And then, you know, it takes a while for the order to be given, time to comply, etc. So it's kind of like 2 months gone. And it's clear owners will only comply when an order is given by bylaw, and sometimes not even then. On some, bylaws had to contract out the work, and that, of course, takes much longer. One property is bragged, they just wait till bylaw contracts it out, and then they just pay the bill. It's cheaper for them to do that. Next slide. We understand this budget will see just 1 more position for vacant properties. And based on this summer, we don't feel that that's adequate, and especially if calls have gone up 10% as well. Your officers do a great job, but they can't keep up. And voluntary compliance on vacant properties without enforcement has been abysmal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and the slides, which help illustrate the point you're trying to make. I have Councillor Devine, you just fell off the screen. Do you still? I'm going to recognize Councillor Devine and then Councillor Plante. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Cheryl, thank you for that presentation. It certainly is very aptly timed based on what came into my inbox recently. And I will be asking bylaw about what capacity they'll have with their new FTEs to address these kinds of vacant home issues. And I do think that it's certainly to a certain extent counterproductive if, as we try to address the many issues of our housing crisis, at the same time we can't address these growing number of vacant properties. But the incident that happened in my ward recently is I have a resident that has been writing to me many times over the past year about being a dutiful and engaged citizen and reporting her neighboring property falling into great disrepair and summoning bylaw and bylaw telling her that it'll be demolished by such and such a date, and that doesn't happen, and she continues to persist. And to add the insult to injury, this dutiful citizen just got an audit letter from VUT. So she has to spend another hour demonstrating that she is a responsible resident of her property while she can't get this vacant property taken down. So I'll certainly be just looking to see about whether or not this increased capacity will address this issue. But thank you for your presentation, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Plante and then Dudas.
Hi, thank you so much, Cheryl. I felt like I was just living in a parallel reality watching your presentation. We are living exactly the same thing on my end of town with many, many problematic addresses, which often involve multiple stakeholders. So social services and police and bylaw and property standards. And it's just, and sometimes they'll have, pit bulls living in there as well, which is a whole nother issue. So I just wanted to say, first of all, I appreciate all of your follow-up. This is basically a part-time job residents have to take on, which is all the follow-up, all the deadlines, making sure things are complied with. And it's extremely taxing on you and other residents because oftentimes when they have these derelict properties, there's things like mice, bed bugs, or the example of the dog I gave. So I just wanted to commend you, first of all, for all the work you do. I would love to have a chat with you at some point, because I know, and Roger can probably give a better explanation than me, but a lot of these deadlines are provincial, like the fine system and the deadlines are provincially based. And so we've sort of bandied about this idea of maybe, writing a letter to our members of provincial parliament to ask them, can you strengthen the laws around this or shorten the timeline? So I'd love to work with you, and I would love to reach out to you, or if you could reach out to me, I would really, really appreciate it, because our neighbors and our neighborhoods deserve better.
They do, and I just want to throw in a comment that I think they're struggling. Bylaw officers are struggling to get back there at the compliance date and time, from what I've seen, and so that's why I think they don't have enough officers. We need a better way, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Councillor Plante. Councillor Dudas, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Cheryl, I just wanted to note that staff aren't able to comment based on a delegation's response, but I'm going to ask them what their thoughts are, what their experience is when it comes time to ask questions to staff, and if they have any suggestions on what they might like to see improved too. And I wanted to thank you for being here and sharing with us your experiences, your community's experiences. There's got to be a better way. So I just wanted to let you know I will be addressing this question to staff, and this is also a heads up to staff so they know what to answer when they get to it. But thank you very much, Cheryl. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Any last call for questions? Ms. Parrott, thank you very much for your delegation today. We appreciate seeing you as always. Okay, I'm going to go back on the speakers list to see the delegation list if Vanya Karam is online or in the gallery. It's the final call. Committee coordinator. All right, so Ms. Karam is not with us today, so we're going to move on to questions to staff about the budget. So any members wish to ask staff, this is the time. Councillor Dudas, please go ahead.
So staff already know what I'm going to ask. Mr. Chapman, Roger, we had heard from that delegation, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on what could be done to improve the system in terms of the permit system and the phone numbers and compliance in terms of these situations.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I'll start off by saying we couldn't have anticipated the amount of work that's come out of the implementation as well as the enforcement in the vacant property bylaw. So, I'll be honest, 2 FTEs is not enough. I'm hoping that 3 FTEs will be enough. The work that the officers have done thus far has been incredible. We're balancing workload increases in other areas. It's difficult to redeploy resources to help with vacant properties or SDR enforcement and other programs that we've taken on this year based on call volumes in other areas. So we did manage to catch up a little bit over the summer with deploying some summer students on vacant property efforts. But, I can give you some statistics. I mean, we have 117 permits issued right now. That's over 500 addresses included in those permits. We've issued 50 Part 1 charges. We've issued 15 Part 3 charges. We're about 56% through the list of vacant properties that are known to us. And this is all since March of 2023. So, I think the numbers show that there's been an incredible amount of work done by the 2 resources. But it's quite obvious that we need additional resources in this area, at least for the first year and a half, to get through the work that chasing the property owners to be able to get these permits issued. And right now, that's our focus. We've issued letters trying to get them into our counter to apply for the permits. That hasn't worked. And now we're in the stages now where we're issuing the charges. But again, every time we issue a charge, there's a Crown brief that has to be done. There's court prep that has to be done. When these charges start going to the courts, then our officers are tied up in court. So, it's nice that we're getting the 4 additional resources. And I can assure you that at least one of those will be on the vacant property enforcement program, and possibly 2 of them to start, at least temporarily, until we get through the hump of, getting all the property owners on board, permitted, and in compliance. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm cognizant within the budget, you will be receiving those additional resources. And as you're saying, you're anticipating there'll be continued pressure on it. I'm almost wondering, is there a natural timeline, say midsummer, I'm just making that up, but that you think you could come back and with your indulgence, Chair, provide us with some insight as to whether that seems to be enough or what you might be anticipating as an ask in the 2025 budget?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. We can commit to providing another update in April. I believe we're on the legislative agenda for our annual report, so we can provide another update then. In addition to that, we're also bringing forward a growth analysis report, which I think is very important. We're just getting through the analysis of what we need for or what we're anticipating for growth, but also to offset some of the increase that we've seen in the last couple of years But I also want to mention, I failed to mention the last time, anytime we bring on a new bylaw, there's always an increase in service requests. And it's difficult to anticipate what kind of work that's going to produce for us. And, at some point, this is going to level out, and those additional resources, we may be able to go back down to the 2 resources. And that's why it's so important to get these 4 additional right now. At least I can apply the 2 additional resources to the vacant property regime at this point and get things caught up. I think once we get everybody permitted and get the signs up and get all the properties into compliance, the 2 resources will be sufficient.
Okay. And that's why I'm hesitant to say, let's just add right now. I'm anticipating you're absolutely correct. It will level out. With your, as I said, with your indulgence, Chair, and with Mr. Chapman's thumbs up, could I give that direction to staff that you do report back to us in April, as you suggested, or when the timing is befitting? Because I think we would like to know if in 2025 we need to see a surge in FTEs for your team, that you're just not, making it work with what you have, and we want a heads up in advance in the budget.
Can you just confirm that that will be part of your report next April?
Mr. Chair, we can accept that. Yes.
Okay, Councillor Levick.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr, you're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. If you don't mind, I will illustrate my question with pictures, if that's okay. I believe the clerk's office has those. So just while they're getting them up, I'm here specifically to ask about an initiative that was mentioned in the presentation on the budget that we just saw. The project is the new training center project for fire services. In the presentation we heard, it was mentioned that you were exploring options for this. If you can just go to the first slide. The first delegate that we heard today spoke about the work that the training services team does. Just for context, it takes place in my ward presently on Industrial Avenue. The small building in the front is the building that they use. It's not accessible. It's small and awkward. We go to the next slide. The training that takes place directly on site includes live fire training. My understanding is there's significant training that takes place here. I think it's 2 classes of recruits of 25 weeks each around. I probably have that wrong, but additional trainings that occur all the time. You can see from this slide that the location is highly unsuitable. There is an apartment building that is currently being built that will be occupied as of May, and the live fire training that occurs there. So I cannot possibly imagine that the training that is required to do this job and have been on full court display behind an apartment building. I'd like just to highlight some incidences of why the training is so important. Just some things over the past 6 weeks. I know we tend to minimize corporate functions, and so I think it would be helpful to emphasize why this training is so important. If we can just go to the next slide. So in the past 6 weeks and close to me, this is a slide from Ottawa Fire Services. This is on Bank and Riverside. Yet another vehicle went into the river there. Not the first time. If we go to the next slide. This is an extrication that had to be done, Chair, in your ward. I cannot possibly imagine the training required to do this work, extricating people from a vehicle. I know personally I was written up in the newspaper for losing my car in the City Hall parkade. So for me to try to imagine the work that is required in this is almost unfathomable. And we'll just go to the next slide. This is something that I've heard Councillor Hill and the first delegate talk to about. This is an incident that happened on in my ward on October 27th. A fire broke out at the General Hospital. We'll just go to the next slide. And so the firefighters assisted with this. And on October 28th, they needed to transport some babies. I heard Councillor Hill mention this. I heard the delegate. But I'll read a quote from my Instagram, Dr. Sarah Lawrence, who's the site chief of neonatology at the Ottawa Hospital, whose comment was, "And those firefighters were amazing, so gentle, compassionate, and caring, helping us every step of the way to move our 17 patients down 8 floors and safely to CHEO, all 27 kilograms of them, the smallest less than 800 grams. My heart is full." So in light of all this complex and highly specialized work that our firefighters do and the intense training required, I would like to understand how much investment is actually required for a new training center, how much of the budget is being dedicated to finding a suitable solution, on what time frame. I found a commitment to replace fluorescent lighting and replace mod bit roof in the budget. I'm not sure what that is, but it seems to me that given the need for highly skilled officers who are responsible for critical life-saving work that directly contributes to the well-being of the city, it is not acceptable for the substandard facility that is inadequate and inaccessible, but also where our current and future firefighters are put on full display for neighbors who have to conduct their trainings in front of everyone. So I'd like to understand, is the amounts allocated in the budget sufficient? And what are solutions that can help meet training standards and provincial regulations?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the fire chief.
Good morning, Chair. Excuse me, Councillor, thank you very much for your question. And I'm going to echo what you said. We do have amazing staff, and I was at the fire at the General Hospital, and it wasn't a lot of hard work was done by the fire services, but also from all emergency services, right from Office of Emergency Management, paramedics, police as well. So there is no secret that our training center has certainly we've outgrown it. We've done a lot of work from our project team to find what is the solution moving forward. The current training center was built in 1977 under former City of Ottawa before amalgamation, and I've said this in the past, and it facilitated 500 firefighters. Currently we have 1,500 firefighters when you take into consideration the career members as well as the volunteers. So we've been working very hard and diligent to find a solution. What we did do is we did an expression of interest, and one hurdle we had is we did have a funding model of 25% city, 75% for a partner. And so when we did the expression of interest, we've met with a lot of partners that were interested in looking at moving ahead with some kind of a partnership property, but the funding model seemed to deter, or there wasn't an appetite for a lot of the proponents that came forward. Our team is committed. Committed to move forward with this project, and I think as part of that is that we are going to have to regroup and seriously look at what is the funding model, what is the what does the city currently have for assets that we can look at to move this project forward. So there's not a day that this isn't on our minds and we're not working on it, and it is a priority for the Ottawa Fire Services.
Thank you. So can you explain to me where in the budget money is allocated to actually work on this project? Is it just in general day-to-day work? Is there any work money that's being put aside to advance this?
There's some, yeah, we do have, there is some funding. We have $100,000 set aside for reviewing options. That was part of our procurement, or our part of our, not our procurement, apologies, but our expression of interest funding. The 25% city is coming from the development fees, but that was hinging on the fact that we find a partner for the other 75%. So that we've obviously looked and we've exhausted that avenue. We do have a lot of partners in the nation's capital that we thought may have interest to partner with us. The NCC, NRC, they all came to the table, and all different partners had different needs as well. So we really in 2024 are going to re-look at what we need to do to move this project forward into the future.
Okay, thank you. Given that apartment building that is directly behind the building is set to be occupied in May, and that will mean that the firefighters who are training to save lives in the city are now going to be on full court display as they try to perform their work and learn the job. And so I'm certainly hoping that by this time next year that we can come back and have a fully costed project available in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I go to the Vice Chair, I just want to ask, notwithstanding the potential need to relocate the center, when the city approved the residential tower that abuts the training center, it doesn't impact the ability of the training center to continue to do what it does with both recruits and existing firefighters, correct? Nothing is going to stop happening at that site due to the fact that a new residential tower is being constructed there.
Chair, thank you for that question. We do live Class A live fire training on that location, and at present it is restricting some of it's a lot of coordination with the construction of the building, the operators. We do have to be aware and conscious that there is smoke that is dissipating in the area, so we do have to coordinate that, and I can only assume once those are residential, people are living in those residential buildings, it will really limit. However, having said that, what we do have is we have an interim solution, a short-term interim solution at Trail Road, where we have our fire dynamics live burning site. So what we're doing is we're pivoting to, with reference to the live fires, we will be relocating, and a lot of our live fires is occurring currently at our Trail Road site as a short-term solution.
Okay, fair enough. I appreciate that. Okay, continuing with the list, Vice Chair Hill is next, and then Councillors Johnson, Hubley, Devine, and Plante.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just to close that discussion out, I do have a parcel of land just across the street from the Trail Road. If you are interested in putting a fire station there, I'd be more than happy to accommodate that discussion. I want to talk about the mental health specialist that was brought up by the fire union. Specific question, I guess, to you, Kim. What's programmed right now in the 24 budget in order to mitigate the mental health concerns that we have? Is it adequate so that we can make the decision here whether we want to make modifications to the budget?
Certainly, I could ask the various chiefs to talk about all of the different initiatives we have from a mental health perspective. EPS itself has a mental health strategy, and the initiative looks forward and what we need to do. WSIB costs are going through the roof, and as a result of that, you've seen in the paramedic investment plan, they've requested and received 3 FTEs to deal specifically with mental health programs. Fire is going through that analysis now to determine what is needed to try and help them in their program. You heard from the president, but I could assure you that the chief also is working on some plans. You will see that in 2024 as from a resource requirement as we move forward. So I think that fire has a current robust plan or has a robust process. However, they need somebody to coordinate it. They need a full-time staff member to actually work it. Because right now everyone's, managing that program on the side of their desk as part of their regular duties, which is a challenge. Bylaw has a peer support team they've just established which also assists with their need. We also have city resources. So if you want specifics on all the different programs we currently offer, my assessment is it's still not enough, unfortunately. And in order for us to bring down the WSIB costs, the sick leave, have people back at work, have people healthier at work, then we're going to have to invest some. However, we need a plan to move forward. And our first initiative was to try and deal with the paramedic ask. And next we will move on to the other emergency services as well.
Okay, I guess with Fire Chief, would you have anything to add to that?
Chair, I think the GM summarized that quite nicely. I think first and foremost, the health and well-being of all our members is extremely important. Our WSIB claims are increasing. We're very appreciative and supportive of the staff resources within the city, but we're trending in the wrong way. And I agree. We're committed. We have a staff investment plan that's going to be before this committee next year. And undoubtedly, you're going to see a recommendation as to what that might look like to help us from a mental health perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Johnson, you're next, and then Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a few questions that are a bit all over the place. So let me see if I can get organized. So I'm so sorry. So a couple of things. One is, we're coming into the colder season. I just want to be sure to understand from Beth Gooding's team that the additional $100,000 that you're receiving to bolster your emergency preparedness response is adequate, and whether that will include those pieces that you're talking about recently of going into community and offering trainings and supporting residents to understand what their responsibilities are, because in some of our conversations with hydro, certainly, that part is still, I had someone post on Facebook the other day that, a hydro outage of 4 hours can be extremely disruptive, right? And you're like, I know that it can be inconvenient, but I'm not sure that we imagine it to be disruptive. I think there's still a lot of education to come around this.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So, Councillor, you're exactly right. We're really excited about this new FTE, but it's because it's going to enable us to bolster the work we're doing, specifically related to the city's climate resiliency strategy and anti-racism strategy, and more specifically, that community level engagement that I've talked about before at this committee. So we are going to be able to continue to interact with community associations, faith-based groups, and others to help them develop emergency plans and get set up such that they're able to support the city and work with us to prepare, respond, and recover from emergencies. We're also working, and we continue to develop our volunteer management protocol because it will be such a force multiplier, and we want to make sure that we bolster that capacity as well. And finally, you've heard me say this before, but we're really excited to be able to do our vulnerable sector mapping because, as I've said, priority populations are always disproportionately negatively affected during emergencies. And what we're doing is we're working with our GIS team and other social services providers for each ward to map out where priority populations may be located and how we may be better able to prepare them for emergencies. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. You know, I think as you mentioned that the coordination with housing services as you do that mapping, because we are starting to see more housing services in, you know, new parts of the ward. And so there's a coordination there, I think, for the kinds of services those vulnerable populations are decentralizing, which is a good thing. Pivoting now to the wildlife strategy. So the wildlife strategy, obviously, you know, we had a bear who was killed in Bell's Corners and Canada South at the beginning of the spring, and it was a pretty upsetting, distressing situation. And I know that we were waiting for the results of the wildlife strategy to offer recommendations that might impact bylaw, but because the wildlife strategy has been delayed, are we seeing any reflection of the potential recommendations for additional FTEs within bylaw to respond in overnight or on weekend wildlife situations, or are we still waiting because, of course, the spring will come before the 2025 budget proposal? So let me know.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I can't speak to what the recommendations will be yet. I mean, the report's still in draft. But there has been discussions about dedicated resources for wildlife management. But I can't speak to whether those will be within bylaw and regulatory services or within another department within the City of Ottawa.
Okay, so we'll be anxiously waiting those recommendations so that Councillor Hubley and I can make sure that it's properly resourced. Next up, I was wondering, one of the delegations had talked about with the vacant properties that they wait until bylaw issues a bill and then they pay the bill because that's cheaper than actually managing their vacant properties on their own. And I have to say, you know, I have a family member who lives beside a vacant property, and the person lives abroad, and that does seem to be the case. They pay their taxes only when they're chased to a certain extent. And my relative has become quite close with the bylaw officer that goes to cut the grass or whatever, supervise whatever needs to be done at that property. So is there any kind of, when do we stop putting our resources into this management of vacant properties, and when do we actually take back the property? Or is there a mechanism for the city to actually say that this property is permanently vacant and we need to do something more, a larger intervention? How does that work in our budgets?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor. At what point do we take back the property? I'd probably have to defer to Cyril on that. I can tell you that when we contract out the work, all costs associated with that work are billed back to the property owner through property tax. And there's administrative costs to that as well that's also billed back. There's reinspection fees that are also billed back at $500 of site visit. I find it hard to believe that anybody is saying that it's cheaper for the city to contract out the work to do a cleanup or a grass cut than it is for them to hire a contractor directly. I can tell you that those costs are significant when we add reinspection fees and the administrative charge on top of what our contractor charges.
Chair, just to kind of add to the latter part of the question, So it is a little bit onerous because there is some provincial guidelines around that. If you recall, I think we're in the process of our second sale of properties this year. We communicate to council and publicly when we do that. Unfortunately, it takes time. There's a process to go through that. So I don't have the exact number of years it takes to get to that point with me, but I can certainly circle back with you. But just appreciate that there's a few consecutive years of not abiding to the property taxes. The bank gets involved, foreclosures. There's a process, right? So unfortunately, you got to go through that onerous process before we finally get to that state where then we can kind of sell from a city perspective. But I'll certainly get the team to send you a little bit more information, definitive information offline if that works.
Sure. And I mean, I appreciate we don't want to just be clawing back people's homes where they live. There's many reasons why people would have outstanding property taxes. So I'm not suggesting that we go back and nail everybody, but in properties where there is no one living there and there appears to be some kind of situation in that respect, I wonder if there's some kind of game that could be happening. And then I just wanted to understand with the ASE Center. So I see that we have an investment on that, which is very exciting. But I understood anecdotally that the process has stalled a bit because we are looking for additional justice of the peace that would then be able to adjudicate challenges on the contesting of the tickets. So I just wonder, is that $4.5 million basically going in this budget, but it'll be phased out, over several years if the process to actually get the center up and running is delayed for any sort of external reasons? Or is this one part of many asks in subsequent budgets?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. The $4.5 million is for bylaw and regulatory services to staff the processing center. So that's our responsibility. Where the tickets go from there and where they're contested, where there's dispute, those go to Service Ottawa. So anything to do with the dispute side would fall under Service Ottawa, and they would have to respond to that. I'm not aware of any discussion about delays. We're ready to go for January 1st, and we anticipate rolling out as we've committed to council previously.
Okay, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear there's no other delays. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley, you're next, and then Devine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to start by thanking Roger and the other department heads for all the service they provide to our residents. I've worked with each of them closely on different issues and sincerely appreciate all they do. My question today is for Roger, and it's going to go back to last year's budget, where we asked and you were able to find a way to implement getting, I believe, 12 extra student officers to help in the summer with issues such as dumping of garbage in the parks and the poop and scoop bylaw, the different ones that are seasonal matters that really require more resources. Are you able to give us an update on how that pilot went?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. The pilot went well. I mean, just with the sheer number of officers that we had in the park and the visibility of officers being in the park, I think, you gain compliance just by having some visibility there. As far as enforcement, we can say that, complaints were down this year in the parks, which is good. But proactive efforts were up. So kind of counterbalances each other. So overall, I would say it was a very successful program. And because of that, we've already committed to hiring the same amount of students as we did last year to try it again this summer. Hope to see further success in that program.
Thank you. That's good news. And I'm glad it was a success. And I agree with you that we can't measure just on the number of tickets issued, that the number of complaints dropped is also a very good measure of success. So thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that it's being renewed for next year. Okay, that's my only question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley, and thank you for your kind comments for our staff. Councillor Devine, you're next, and then Conseiller Plante.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a bit of a dog's breakfast of questions here. So I believe my colleague, Councillor Hill, may be speaking to the issue of what we heard from Firefighter Foundation in terms of mental health. So I'll wait until I hear that from my colleague. So I'll start on public safety service. So during one of our recent many extreme weather events, I remember, Beth, we discussed some possible alternatives for how the city broadcasts, communicates the availability and location of emergency municipal resources. For example, we talked about the option of perhaps providing mapped information, visual information of where residents can find and access municipal emergency services, as opposed to publishing a list of the names of facilities. Oftentimes residents, myself included, don't know the names of the facilities in close proximity. Is there any movement on that kind of, I don't want to say more clear information, just an alternative way? Is there any movement on that can be expected with Budget 2024?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So there's a couple of things we're always trying to, and thank you for the question, because we're always trying to enhance the ways in which we engage with the public during emergencies. It's so critical. And so there's two things that we're working on. We are working on a pilot with the Ottawa Police Service and our Public Information and Media Relations to develop a low-tech public alerting system that would rely on text messages that people can register for and that we can use to push out key information after an emergency. What we find is that even during power outages where the cell networks get sort of busy, text messages get through. And so that's one thing that we are actively working on. And the other thing is that we're always trying to improve the look and feel of our website. And so we do have some initiatives underway to make it easier to navigate for people to find emergency preparedness information.
Great, thank you very much. So question either for yourself or for Cyril. In the Community Social Services Committee budget, they approved $1 million in funding to install 4 new generators at emergency reception and lodging sites across the city. I was certainly very happy to see any kind of capital investment that speaks to increasing our emergency power resiliency, but I was unsure of why it was in the CSS budget, not the EPPS budget. I'm sure that these generators will serve a business continuity purpose, but can either of you speak to how these assets might be seen as complementary to our citywide goals of building overall power resiliency?
Chair, yeah, so we had a 4-year or 4-phase plan for adding more generators to a number of sites. This is the 3rd year, I believe. And what those are doing is basically we have identified 16 sites where we classify as emergency lodging sites during an emergency event. So that's what we've been doing each year, adding the generators so they're stationary to those sites. What we've also done in 2023, we did buy 5 additional generators that are more mobile to be better flexible. And one thing that I'm really excited about, it was kind of cool, is we are in the final stages of procuring 5 F-150 Lightning. So that's the electric truck, the light duty truck. In that truck, we have the opportunity to do an upgrade where they come with a built-in generator. And that built-in generator can run an arc welder, which is pretty powerful. So it gives you the ability to kind of run a bit more than your normal standard, really small generators. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of we're now using an electric vehicle, which is great because it's electric, no GHG emissions. It's more affordable on the maintenance side. But then it gives us a little bit more flexibility during an emergency event where we have mobility with a built-in generator on pack to help out where we can. So there's a couple different things that we've been doing over the years to kind of increase our support towards those emergencies.
Great.
Can I just jump in? So sorry, from an accounting perspective, though, the generators are charged to Community Services Committee because they're part of community centers which fall under that department?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yes, that's fine with me. But speaking of those 4 generators that will be at, I think you referred to them as emergency reception centers. If there's 4 community centers or sorry, reception centers that will get those fixed assets. Can I assume that those are interspersed across the city?
Chair, so there will be 16 in total when we're all done. This is the third year of it.
Okay.
And yes, it is distributed across.
Great. Thank you. A question back to Beth. So you have 2 new FTEs. I'm very glad to see that. Can you just briefly, what are the 2 roles of those 2 FTEs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So as discussed previously, one of them is for the Office of Emergency Management. And I think I described the key focus through Councillor Johnson's question, which was great. And then the other one is a security supervisor for our corporate security program. This individual is helping to manage safety and security services at City Hall and the other administrative facilities, which is a really key role. What we always want to do is balance the safety and security of people who come to our facilities and support their civic engagement. But the security environment in the city and by consequence at our facilities is evolving and becoming a little bit more challenging. And so this officer is key to helping to manage our security operations center, which is 24/7, and our security guards on site.
Great. You made reference earlier to the use of volunteers as a force multiplier. Councillor Hill and I are very intrigued by some conversations that we've been having with some groups. Can I assume that during the course of 2024 that we will see some tangible milestones achieved in terms of how we take advantage of community engaged groups as a sense of building our volunteer emergency respond resources?
Yes, thanks again, Mr. Chair, for the question. Definitely, we are also working with our legal services to make sure that we have the right frameworks in place to support that kind of engagement. And it's multi-pronged. You know, we're looking at enhancing and even engaging in new agreements with volunteer organizations that are perhaps like incorporated and some more organized. And then we're also looking at you know, the spontaneous volunteers that are interested in the community and putting up their hand during an emergency response.
And I'm sure, and I'm very glad that legal services is working on it too, because it's always been a bit of a barrier. And I'm sure that all of that work will somehow play into also how you advance our individual and community emergency preparedness outreach, the Are You Ready and the community emergency toolkit programs. So thank you, Beth. Moving over to paramedic services. This is a small little, I'm just curious. We have our Ottawa Central Ambulance Communication Center, the dispatch that provides call taking and dispatching services to all of Eastern Ontario, including Ottawa. I noted in the budget, there's a decrease of $1,000. It goes up and then it plateaus, but for 2024, it decreases by $1,000. I'm not sure if that's the coffee budget or is that just, I'm not sure what line it was. It was for CACC. It's that dispatch. It goes down by $1,000. Is that not even worth the time, I'm sure, of me to ask?
Thank you, Chair. If I can have a budget line, perhaps it would be a little clearer for us. I'm not aware that
I'll
budget
follow up with
would
that.
actually go down. I think it would actually go up. It's also 100% funded by the province.
Of course. Thank you. Pierre, a question on, so I'm very happy to see the 28 new FTEs. The briefing we had from you last year or earlier this year was certainly a very sobering account. I just want some clarity that not all of those 28 FTEs are funded by the city. Some of that is provincial commitments. So my basic question is, with those 28 FTEs, are we on track for the very urgent goals you laid out? And how many of those 28 FTEs are not yet funded?
Thank you for the question through the chair. The 28 FTEs are into 4 buckets. And if you can bear with me for a second, last June in our investment report to committee and council, we asked for 23 FTEs plus 17 to deal with offload delay. Subsequent to that ask, there was an emergency motion put forward to immediately hire 14. So of the 28, 9 are related to the investment report. Another 3 were related to our request for mental health support. So that's 3. So that's 9 plus 3. Later this fall, we received a notice from the province to 100% fund community paramedics, excuse me. And one of our community paramedics programs that was on a year-to-year grant basis, the province decided to fully fund it 100% on an ongoing basis, so it became base funding. So that's 7 more FTEs. And then the latest 9 is related to the fact that post-COVID, the province pulled back funding, but the responsibility for the paramedic service to continue to provide our infection prevention and control methods and our vehicle stocking processes haven't changed as a result post-COVID. We're still maintaining those processes. So through discussions, we're able to secure 9 positions, which are being funded 50% by the city and 50% by the province. So that's the 28. The last piece of the investment report was 17 FTEs to offset offload delays. And currently today, we're still in discussions with the province, and I think I have a meeting next week with the province again, the mayor's office and Chair Brockington to review where we're at with that. Essentially what's happened is that the CEO of the Ottawa Hospitals put forward a proposal asking the province to provide $4.5 million so that they can augment their offload nurse programs to reduce our offload delays. So that's the status of the 28, and then I guess the non-status of the 17 as we currently exist. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. One last question. So just over to bylaw. So I'll be bringing an inquiry on the issue of Ottawa Spay and Neuter Clinic, but I just wanted to ask one question with regards to the rates proposed in the 2024 budget. As I was looking through the various rate increases, it seems that across all of our rates, there's an average increase for 2024 ranging between like 2.2 and 2.7%, you know, with a little bit of fluctuation here and there. And I do understand that when it comes to our rates for our various spay and neuter categories, it's on a cost recovery basis. But what I did see, whereas all of the other rates are in the range of 2 to 2.5, for our various spaying and neutering fees, it's certainly a higher average. It's an average of about 5% increase for 2024, and that increase is about 15% since 2022. So can you speak to why there's, it may be the cost recovery aspect, but can you speak to about why there's such a higher rate of increase, especially since 2022 for that area, especially considering all the issues that I'm going to be speaking to soon enough about the lack of affordable access to these kinds of services?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yeah, you're exactly right. It is about cost recovery. The intended purpose of the clinic is to remain at cost neutral. It's not about providing revenues back to the city. You know, we're trying to make spay and neuter or sterilizations cost affordable for the most vulnerable people. The issue that we've had in the last couple of years is there's been significant cost increase in hydro equipment costs and medications. So the cost increase that you're seeing reflected in the 2024 budget is really about showing the true reflection of those increases.
Yeah, and this is not something for 2024, but I think that if those costs go up, as they do, if we find that those costs going up are hypothetically pushing customers into other directions, then rather than, it might be a question later on about what the city can do to subsidize those fees if by increasing the cost, we're not meeting our goals of trying to get as many animals spayed and neutered, because you made it pretty clear in your briefing to me, the consequences of not being able to effectively have those animals spayed and neutered. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if you don't mind, I'll get your question because I've been stumped for the first time so far this budget, knock on wood. The one negative, it's rounding. So at the end of the day, that program is 100% funded by the province, but you can appreciate rounding. So it's just rounding.
I had a feeling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Conseiller Plante, and then second rounders.
Yeah, merci tout le monde. Very interesting discussion this morning. I'm not even sure who to address my question to. I have three. So for the first one, I believe it was North Battleford, Saskatchewan. It might be you, Roger. You saw the community, because I'd forwarded you the article that, like, I know you charge when the bylaw officer has to visit the property, but they're now charging for when ambulance or fire or paramedics or whatever have to visit the properties. Is this something you think would be helpful, given the situation in my area and the amount of problematic addresses we have?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. I'd have to look into the item more. I can get back to you maybe before council. But I'd have to have a look at what the legislative agenda or the enabling legislation that they're using to create such a bylaw. I'm not sure that maybe I can defer to Stuart here from legal to make a comment.
Mr. Chair, exactly that, what the director has indicated. We would have to evaluate Ontario's enabling legislation as it compares to another municipality across Canada, and have to consult with bylaw regulatory services and other agencies.
Perfect. No, well, maybe I'll try to get a copy of it for you, and then that way we can go from there. Okay. My second question is, we used to have something called the MDPAT, the Multidisciplinary Public Address Team. This was, I believe, around before the pandemic. It's something I've been asking about. We sort of kind of created one in my office. We try to meet sort of once a month to talk about problematic addresses. I know there's issues around privacy that I can't sit in on, and that's fine. We just sort of want a general update on some really problematic addresses. But would, your FTEs aside, and if you kind of had a magic wand, would something like that be helpful citywide, do you think?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. We do this citywide informally. We have a close relationship with Ottawa Police, and we do have discussions on problematic addresses, and we do share information back and forth time to time. But it seems like these addresses are growing. That's for sure. But yes, it's having these discussions and making sure that these are on our radar for enforcement staff that are on the road, and they're aware of some of the safety issues that come with these problematic addresses as well. That's something that's paramount for us.
I'm gonna, I think, take that as a yes, but I'm not sure. Okay, thanks, Roger. My last question is, if you had a magic wand and you could ask the province to kind of change any legislation or regulations that you think would be helpful, which ones would you prioritize?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question, I think. There's a few. I mean, obviously the legislative process for any enforcement activity that occurs under the Building Code Act is it's onerous. There's legislated timelines to allow for an appeal process, and then there's always, you have to allow for enough days for the property owner to become compliant. So depending on the scope of the work, that could be anywhere from 21 days to 60 days or longer in some cases, depending on if we're in the winter and there's work that has to be done on the exterior. Obviously they can't be painting in winter months, so we have to extend that compliance deadline. But certainly, we'd like to see maybe a tighter appeal process. So currently it's set at 14 days, plus we have to allow 5 days for delivery of service. So the minimum timeline we work under right now is 19 days for property standard orders.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if it would even just be helpful if they allowed municipalities to kind of figure out their own rules around this, if that would just even be more helpful, kind of like they did for the vacant unit tax. Anyway, just stuff I'm considering. Please reach out anytime if you need anything. And thank you for all the great work you guys do, especially in my ward. I know it can be very challenging.
Thank you, Councillor, for your questions. I want to give priority to councillors who have not yet posed their questions. So Councillor Hill, I'm going to wait for 1 second and recognize Councillor King. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And I do have just a number of questions. They might bounce around in terms of the focus, but I do have page numbers that I flagged for staff. So on page 5, there is a focus or a mention around emergency management courses. The rates aren't increasing for those. And I was just curious, what are these specific courses and what do they entail? I'm assuming they're not the CPR type courses. So just curious as to what those courses are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The courses are, I'll start by addressing the fees. The reason that the fees are relatively low and not changing is that these are provincial courses for which we use their material. And we have some staff who do the delivery. The courses are related to our incident management system. So when we mobilize our emergency operations center, it needs a sort of EM framework to follow. And so there are different levels of courses that help people become familiar with how to operate within an emergency operations center.
Okay, no, I appreciate that because that was a bit cryptic to me versus some of the other courses that are offered to the public. So thank you for that explanation. On page 36, we have a focus on compensation savings, mainly as a result of staffing delays. And I was just wondering if staff could explain the staffing delays and the associated expense of $350,000 defined as compensation savings.
Chair, I'll take this one just because it kind of is prevalent across the organization. So this is in respect to the forecast for 2023 budget, how we're tracking there. So I've made this comment a couple of times throughout the committees with budget is we are struggling to staff across all departments in terms of the labor force. I've called it a labor market or an employee market. And this exists within this less so on the fire paramedic side, but probably more on the bylaw and even on the public policy side. But we are seeing that little bit of a lagging time to find the qualified talent. And this is not exclusive to this organization or the municipality. This is global across public and private sectors. I made a comment on Wednesday or Tuesday this week. I think we're starting to see, hopefully we've got to the bottom. We're starting to see a little bit of an uptake, or at least that's what I'm seeing from my HR department side, as I see some of the private sector kind of tighten up the belts or kind of even, shorten or reduce their staff. We're seeing a little bit more interest coming back into our sector in terms of, we do provide a very good diverse opportunity, good career, good cushion safety net. So we're starting to see that now coming out of the pandemic.
And I appreciate that because the work that bylaw does is absolutely critical to our city in terms of the depth and the breadth of what occurs in terms of enforcement. And we know that, at least in my office, bylaw issues are second in calls behind traffic complaints. So I'd like to ask some questions about the adequacy of bylaw enforcement staffing. So I'm just wondering if staff could break out how many people are employed full-time, how many are part-time, and how many are students or are classified as casual, temporary in terms of bylaw enforcement.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. So 2024 will be at 222.9 FTEs. Some of those are broken down into, as you've stated, part-time and casual staff, particularly in our parking enforcement world. So I think we're about 65% are full-time officers. The remaining 35% is broken down into several different part-time roles. And that's really to offset some of the enforcement programs that we run on the weekend and in the evenings.
I appreciate that. I think what I'm hearing from my residents is an increased need around staffing for bylaw, especially around property standards. I know there was some discussion about vacant units, vacant properties from both colleagues as well as deputations today. But I think it's very clear that we're seeing a real need for more officers based on the call volumes that we're receiving. I noted in page 44 that there are 4 FTEs that will be allocated to support increased call volumes. I'm just wondering if you could talk to the fluctuations in the need. Obviously, the needs are increasing, but do you see any fluctuations? Have there been any fluctuations since we've started to emerge from the pandemic?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I wouldn't say that we've seen any drastic spike in service requests in any particular area, whether that's parking, property standards, or in our generalists. But we have seen an increase year over year, which is compounding. So, and then, we've onboarded 3 new programs this year, which has had its challenges. So obviously with 3 significant programs, tow trucks, STRs, and vacant properties, that increases the workload for us. But, there's other factors that contribute to increased call volume, aging infrastructure. We have intensification. There's generational homes because of the cost of housing right now. This has led to, driveway widenings and such because there's more than 2 cars in a household. Those all increase, calls to bylaw. So, as I said, we're working on a growth analysis report. It's not just about looking at, an increase in FTEs. We're looking at other efficiencies. We're looking at where our calls are, when our calls come in, what day of the week. So we're looking at an entire new deployment model. I think that we will require an investment from council going forward. But I think, so far, again, we're only in draft, but so far what we're looking at, I think is encouraging for everyone. I think, we'll see some improvement in the service.
And that growth report will be shared with both committee and council?
That's correct.
Excellent. And my last question revolves around page 44. I was just wondering, does revenue from increased parking fines appear, or why does revenue from increased parking fines appear as a decrease in that line item?
So chair, through the chair, so that's a revenue item. So we show revenue as cash coming in. So the expenditure side we show as the positive number, which is cash going out. But then the revenue coming in, we show as a negative. So it helps reduce the expenditure side. It's an accounting thing.
Okay. I appreciate that. Those are all my questions, Chair. Thank you for indulging me. And I really want to thank staff for the excellent work across the board, our paramedic service, bylaw, everybody who's working on emergency preparedness. You're doing yeoman's work on behalf of the city, and we are very appreciative for it. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor King. We appreciate your questions. And now I'll go back to the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So just my closing comments on this round of debate is that I heard loud and clear from our Ottawa Fire Services, our Ottawa Fire Union, they're concerned about mental health in the force. I heard from staff about mitigations downstream and also about the productivity issue. Not only is adequate mental health supports about taking care of our troops, but it's also about getting folks back out and operating sooner than otherwise, because the last thing we would want is for folks to get into dark spaces. We're all victims of our experience, and certainly I know Councillor Luloff spoke about this in his first interaction about the mental health and the importance of the mental health of our frontline service providers, and as am I. And it's important to me to see that we're making sure that we have the right investments for those for those folks that are out protecting us and taking care of our residents. So I just wanted to highlight that it's my intent, Mr. Chair, to put forward a motion at council to add 1 FTE to Ottawa Fire Services for the purposes of mental health intervention support. And I just wanted to give due notice so that we have the time to coordinate exactly what that would mean in terms of offsets, in terms of requirements. And certainly I'm willing to ante up my piece as much as possible. What I can do if there are components of my community benefits, charges budget, or cash in lieu, or traffic calming, or any of the operational lines that I have, I'd be willing to put some of that towards this because I think it's important. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hill, for that, and certainly work with staff to fine tune the wording and how it will be financed. That would be appreciated. Would the clerk's office just remind members what the deadline is, or what the requested date is to get draft motions in for consideration? What is that date?
Mr. Chair, appreciating that members can always introduce a motion at council, we've requested that members submit their budget motions by end of day Sunday to provide sufficient time for finance to review them.
Okay, that's appreciated. I've just got 2 themes of questions which I pursue. A number of my questions that I came to this meeting with have been asked already. The investment in bylaw, the training center for fire services, and budget for emergency preparedness. So my questions are as follows. In the event that there is a judgment in 2024 with respect to the ongoing taxi litigation, if the city is required to pay $1 or more, how does that get accounted for in the budget?
So Chair, so we don't have any specific money earmarked for this. So it would be, we do have insurance. That would be our first, I'm not sure if we have insurance for this component. Stuart, you might be able to correct me on that, but any residual would have to come from our reserves, which is part of the reason why we do hold reserves, is for these one-time unforeseen, non-predictable things.
So sorry, just to clarify, if there's a significant judgment against the city, we have insurance to cover that, or a portion thereof?
Mr. Chair, just with respect to the question, I can update members of the committee that the litigation matter involving the City of Ottawa's vehicle for hire bylaw was actually in court this week with the conclusion of oral closing submissions. It's still before the courts. The issue that the court is addressing right now is the issue of liability. If there is a finding of liability, that would then turn into a second phase, which would deal with the issue of damages. And of course, there are always the issues of opportunities for appeal from the decisions on liability and or damages. So in some respects, Mr. Chair, it would, because the matter is before the courts, the forecasting, other than what the Chief Financial Officer has indicated, in some respects may be premature at this point.
Okay, fair enough. The other set of questions I have are regarding the investment in paramedic FTEs throughout 2023. We're now in the final month of this year, and I'd like the chief to give the committee an update on what our emergency response times have been compared to last year. Are we holding our own? Are they getting better? Are they being challenged? And the second question is regarding the offload delays. Have our investments in more paramedics had any type of dent in the offload delay numbers and the amount of time that we're spending in the hospitals?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. On the first item, or on the second item, then I'll come to the first, offload delay. Currently, year to date, offload delay is worse in 2023 than it was in 2022. The 90th percentile benchmark that's used has gone from 2 hours 37 minutes to 2 hours 42 minutes. And I think that's just in the last couple of days I took a look at that. So that's unfortunate that our investments continue to be absorbed inappropriately in the delay that we spend at the hospitals. The first question regarding our response times, currently, we get the final data drop, I would say, from the province after post year end. So the final determinants of those benchmarks or performance standards is not officially known usually till the first quarter of the next year. But we do track it throughout the year, and currently some of our benchmarks have improved. Notably, the number of patients we actually take to the hospital is down by a couple of percentage points. Of note, though, the most concerning benchmarks of sudden cardiac arrest and our highest acuity patients called the CTAS ones, which is the Canadian Triage Acuity Scale. The patients that are most urgent, we're tracking that right now, and we've seen very little improvement. But that final determination is yet to be provided, as in it'll come in the first quarter of next year. So overall, it's been a difficult year for us. Our call volume is up. Our responses are up. The good part is that we're trying to take less patients to the hospital because we know that is arguably in many respects which affects our performance to the community the most. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chief. I do recognize that adding more FTEs will help address response times, because we are responsible for responding to those calls. And if calls go up, your FTEs have to correspond to that increase. So I think the committee is moving in the right direction. As I've said before, we could have an paramedic on every street corner. It will have no impact on the offload challenge that we have at the hospitals. We could have a whole queue of paramedics waiting to come in. That is where significant progress must be made. We've talked about this for years. So I certainly appreciate and want to underscore that the investment that this committee is making for paramedic FTEs is absolutely the right way to go. And we need to look at the data with you, Chief, to make sure that our investments are at the right levels. So thanks for a great set of questions, colleagues, on this matter. I do want to provide one last opportunity. If there's anyone else that wants to comment or ask any further questions, if not, we're going to vote. The Vice Chair read the roadmap that we're going to vote on now. I do want to acknowledge Councillor Luloff did raise a matter at the beginning, and I believe on the actual roadmap, the matter that Councillor Luloff will recuse himself from voting is item 3BI. Committee Coordinator, can you just confirm that to be true?
That is correct, Chair.
Okay, so I would recommend we'll vote on that first. Councillor Luloff, if you'd like to step away, I'll just note that the councillor has stepped away. And colleagues, can we approve item 3BI on the roadmap? Is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. We'll call Councillor Luloff back. Good to see you. And now on all other matters of the budget, is that carried?
Carried.
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 Thank you, colleagues. Okay, we've dealt with item 5. Item 6 is in-camera items. Any in-camera? Not that I'm aware of. Notices of motion. Any notices of motion? I see no hands. Item 8 is inquiries. Do you have an inquiry? Do you have one?
I have one. Caitlin or Chris, did you get the last email I sent with the updated one? It said final. Yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Devine, you have an inquiry. Please read it into the record.
Thank you, Chair. Great. So the Holla Bell Foundation is a registered not-for-profit in the process of obtaining charitable status, whose mission is to promote animal welfare through funding the spaying and neutering of domestic, feral, and stray animals, which helps both the community as a whole and individual residents. Similar to the city's spay-neuter clinic, the objective of sterilizing these animals is to control population growth and reduce the number of unwanted animals in need of shelter and care. The foundation is currently using the facilities of a spay-neuter clinic in Brockville. As the City of Ottawa's spay and neuter clinic is currently open for surgeries only 4 days per week, the foundation has expressed interest to the city in accessing its spay neuter clinic facilities during the days it is not currently operational in order to expand its animal sterilization efforts in the Ottawa area. Recently, the Hollabell Foundation and other individuals and residents have made inquiries about whether Ottawa's spay and neuter clinic can be made available for the other 2 to 3 days per week when the clinic is not operational, should another licensed veterinarian and/or credible organizations have the capacity to deliver professional services, and assuming the additional costs could be covered by other parties. Recognizing that there may be legislative barriers in this regard and that the current spay-neuter clinic's own veterinarian is operating at capacity, could staff review the feasibility and costs of expanding the current clinic facilities and operation to other parties in order to accommodate additional surgeries at a time when issues of animal control is a growing concern? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Devine. Further inquiries, Councillor Luloff?
Just a question on that particular topic, Mr. Chair. Could this be changed to a direction so that we can get that information back rather than just ask if it's like, because an inquiry is just to ask, like this inquiry is asking for the feasibility of perhaps looking at this. Can we direct staff to look at this instead? Just a question, Chair.
Yeah, perhaps I'll ask the deputy clerk for some advice on the difference between inquiry and direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a member may submit an inquiry and staff would be required to bring back a written response on that. In order to proceed with a direction, that would need to be something formally added to an agenda, either through notice of motion at committee or at council.
So I suppose then, Mr. Chair, we'll wait for the inquiry to come back, lift it as an IPD, and then provide direction at that time. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, any other inquiries? Okay, any other business? Before we close off, I'll just say the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for January 18th. I'll just note that that was put on our 2024 schedule in the event that a meeting is necessary. I'd say it's about 50% chance that that meeting will be canceled, if not more, which we'll let you know early in the new year. Otherwise, the next meeting will be on the 15th of February. So I look forward to seeing you at that point. So we will not see you into the new year. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, and Happy New Year. And great to see you all. Great year together in this inaugural committee of Ottawa City Council. And we appreciate all the good work of all employees that contribute to our great city each and every day. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Good job,
Thanks
Chair.
for a great job, Chair.